The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, How Rising Housing Prices Impact State Economies. My name is Amanda Lambert, and I'm the Marketing Event Coordinator at REMI, and I will be your host today. Today's webinar will be presented by our REMI analyst, Gaisha Blackshear. She works to ensure REMI users are able to effectively incorporate the REMI model into their organizations and support their economic modeling needs. Throughout the webinar, you may submit questions for Gaisha to answer, and the presentation will last for about 1 hour with the last 10 minutes left for those questions. With no further ado, I will hand the webinar over to Gaisha.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Amanda. And with that being said, we will hop right into our agenda. So just to give you all a brief overview of what to expect during this presentation today, is that first we're going to go through an overview of REMI, explaining who we are, what we do, and as well as how our model works. The next thing in which that I'm going to do is give you all some context involving how has the rising housing prices impacted the macroeconomy, but as well as really center in on our case study state today, which is going to be the state of Oregon. Then the next thing we're going to transition to is going to be an overview of our TaxPI model and as well as our SCI module, as we will be going over some of the impacts in which that rising housing prices has on Oregon fiscally, and as well as on its social economic part as well. And then we'll go into our TaxPI model demonstration, which will also feature an Excel spreadsheet where I'll give you a thorough breakdown of the assumptions in which I'm making for today's demo. And lastly, we will hop right into our question and answer session. So without further ado, so who exactly are we? For those who don't know, we've been around for about 40 years, and we're known as the gold standard of economic modeling. What makes us the gold standard is the fact that we combine 4 important concepts, which include the input-output, general equilibrium, econometrics, and as well as economic geography. With these 4 things combined, this makes our tool very powerful because we're able to give an analysis of inter-industry impacts, as well as use advanced statistics, and as well as geographic concentration to further understand the long-run stability of economies and how different sectors are affected, whether that is labor, industry, GDP, or output. And so you may be asking, how exactly do we define regions? So the greatest part about it is the fact that the regions are customized according to our client's needs. So either that can be a state, a county, a group of counties, or even a city. Whatever can be tracked through the census, all the way down to the blocks, we can incorporate into the model to give you visibility into the regional economic impacts. And then so with that being said, how exactly does dynamic compare to static models? So static models only capture a point in time, but yet they aren't accounting for other things that could be occurring within the economy. And we all know that's not how economies work. However, with dynamic modeling, we're able to understand the changes over time and also how different economic factors affect each other. And then this is through the use of multiple things, such as multipliers, and as well as really observing how is each facet going to interact with each other. And then we'll get deeper into that once we go to our economic building block slide, which is going to give you all like an overview of the model and as well as how it works. And then so just to again give like a general overview of of how the REMI model works. So first we take a qualitative question in which that we're trying to quantify. And then so from that, we're going to piece the different variables and as well as the data in which that we have available and transport those into policy variables. And then so from there, we are going to we are going to have our baseline and as well as our alternative forecast, which is going to allow for us to compare the effects of each and as well as prepare our analysis so we can understand what is going to occur in the short run and as well as the long run. And the best thing about the REMI model is the fact that we can forecast these effects all the way out until 2060. And then so next, we're just going to hop right into the economic impacts of rising housing prices. So as we all know, is that this has been something that has been very prevalent, especially with the onset of the pandemic and as well as what is occurring now. Affordability in particular has been an issue. However, things have been exacerbated due to multiple different reasons. But the key considerations in which that we're going to isolate for today's demonstration and as well as for the sake of training so we won't get too that is going to be primarily dealing with employment, direct investment, and as well as economic growth. So job creation. Job creation is a catalyst for, job creation is a catalyst for an increase in housing prices. And then from that increase in housing prices, it's primarily because now you have things such as employment and as well as different inputs, which also tie directly into direct investment, which is going to create an economic boom, which is something in which that we observe in things such as our GDP output and as well as employment. And as well as with this, since housing prices, housing prices also create a boom in particular in housing construction, which provides a widespread employment growth for various industries and as well as income groups. But as we know, is that throughout the pandemic, the low interest rates actually encourage residential investment from not only traditional home buyers, but as well as investors. But this also created some imbalances in supply and demand, and as well as an increase in the inputs substantially, such as like with lumber, its peak reached all the way up to 114%, and as well as iron and steel were up 73%. So with this being said, we see how this plays a significant role in not only our regional economies, but as well as in our national economy as well. But for today's demonstration, we're going to focus particularly on the state of Oregon. So, and the three things in which that we're going to use is going to be, well, the three things in which that we have to consider with the state of Oregon is the fact that there is massive housing underproduction, as well as there's affordable, as well as like, which translates to also being an affordability crisis, and as well as giving some context about Oregon's economy. So right now, the state of Oregon is experiencing its longest economic expansion in modern history, and it's also one of the fastest growing states within the US. And the reason why Oregon has been so attractive, especially in attractive to people, is because of the high-paying jobs and as well as its natural amenities as well. But however, within Oregon, for the past 20 years, there has been an approximate, however, in the state of Oregon, there has been approximately over 100,000 housing shortages. And then this is primarily due to the lack of supply response, especially because of its bustling population. So And of course, as I said before, I said this has created some supply and demand imbalances. And then this is primarily caused by the barriers of entry when it comes to financing for land acquisition, development, and as well as construction. And then so with this being said, this has in turn made home ownership out of reach for those within the lower to middle class. And because of the rapid appreciation in which that we've seen across the United States has been exacerbated within Oregon. And then I'm going to show you all how bad it's been with the Excel spreadsheet in which I prepared based upon the average home values. And then so now so before I show you all the Excel sheet and as well as how to calibrate your TaxPI model to work for you, we're first going to go over what exactly is TaxPI and as well as SEI. So our TaxPI model allows for state and local governments to understand the dynamic macro impacts. So our TaxPI model allows for state and local governments to understand the dynamic macroeconomic, fiscal, and policy decisions. So it allows for states to gather the extra layer of economic analysis that allows for them to understand how will these policy shocks impact their revenues and as well as expenditures. And then as we can see here in our 5 blocks, especially with the onset of different taxes in which that can be applied in the TaxPI model, we can further understand how would an increase in a corporate income tax cause an increase in the production costs and could possibly lessen the domestic market share and as well as lessen output. And then so as we can see is that with our 5 blocks, this sends ripple effects throughout the model, which allows for you to understand the short run and as well as long-term impacts on things such as employment, population, output, and as well as our socioeconomic indicators module, which is our premier add-on feature. And so what SEI allows for you to do is to basically have a more granular analysis of your human capital. So it allows for you to forecast the effects of your policies and how this would affect compensation distribution, employment by race and gender, employment by educational attainment, unemployment, and a variety of different things. So not only are we focusing on the hard economic numbers, but we're also focusing on the human aspect, such as which communities will suffer the most from an increase in the corporate income tax. Like, will this cause the lowest 20% or the highest 20% to gain the most jobs? Will this widen the income inequality between the middle class and as well as upper class? So it allows for you to really answer the next step of qualitative questions in which that previously, so this allows for you to answer qualitative questions with quantitative reasoning, which previously could not be answered. And so we're going to hop right into that once we do our TaxPI demonstration. And then with that being said, before we hop into the TaxPI model demonstration, I just want to give you all just some quick facts of what we'll be doing. So for the impact study, this will feature the state of Oregon, and the policy variable in which that we're going to focus on is going to be consumer spending, just so it will not overcomplicate things. And also also we thought that this would be a great starting point, especially for the data available. And then the detail in which we're going to add is the percent increase from the years 2020 until 2022 on the model. And then the data source in which you were using this from is going to be Zillow home values. And then, of course, the analytical tools are going to be the TaxPI model and as well as the socioeconomic indicators SEI module. So with that being said, I'm just going to exit out the PowerPoint. We'll hop right into it. And so now I'm in my Excel sheet. And then so, as I said, is that this is from the Zillow Home Value Index. And then so what it does is that it gives us the average home value prices over time. And then so I decided to start the fiscal year. I decided to start the fiscal year in March, simply because that's when most things shut down in 2022. Well, not most things, but then the whole world shut down due to the pandemic. And then so just to understand the trend previously, I decided to do the percent change formula by the year. So as we can see is that from the years 2018 until 2022, the average home prices actually were increasing, but yet they started increasing exponentially starting from the years 2020 until 2022. And as you can see is that at first it only increased by 6%, which is relatively normal, although national averages are about 2%. But as we know, housing is local. And then as we can see is that from 2019 to 2022, it kind of started to trend towards the national average. However, when the pandemic came about, you can see this one all the way up to 17.9%. So we're going to come back to this data later, but I did want to give you all just some context what we'll be doing. But just to show you all how exactly we use this, or rather how we get to this point in order to create this policy scenario, I'm just going to open up the model. And then so I did want to say is that before I begin is that and also before we begin, if you all need more in-depth training about the model, because this will primarily feature the budget calibration and as well as the scenario. But if you need an an explanation about everything, feel free to email feel free to email info@remi.com, and we'll be happy to schedule a one-on-one session with you. To go over your unique problems. But with this being said, so when you come into any of our suite of products, you're going to be presented with this nice tile layout. And the regional forecast and as well as national forecast is going to feature your baseline variables forecasted all the way out until 2060 without any policy shocks. But however, this will not feature the most crucial part of this particular model, which is going to be the fiscal analysis part. But then that's going to be up to you to add once we go through the step-by-step process. And then our regional control is what we're going to use in order to create our budget and as well as to create the TaxPI functionality. Then our regional simulation is what we're going to use the numbers from our Excel sheet for. And then so with that being said, we're going to hop right into budgets. And then so, as you all can see, I've created some budgets, but just for the sake of, just for the sake of those who may not have experience with the TaxPI module, I'm just going to show you how to create a new budget. We're just going to go to add new budget here. And then so as we can see, we have the ability to rename it. So we'll just rename this the Oregon budget, Oregon demo budget. Then we're going to double click on it. And then this is going to give us a chance to choose how we like our fiscal year and as well as our units to be counted as. So for the sake of this particular, budget, since our fiscal year started in March, in accordance to our Excel sheet, we'll also put that for this particular budget as well. And then from the units, we'll keep these at millions. Then we're going to hop right over here to our budget feature. Oh, and then I did want to say is that another thing is that for those of you who have a TaxPI model that has multiple regions, you're going to have an additional section here, which is going to allow for you to choose which particular region or state in which that you like to work with for your budget. I just wanted to give that one heads up. So, and then so as you all can see is that we have our revenues and as well as expenditures tab. So the first thing in which that we're going to work on is our revenues. And then so with this particular feature here, this gives you a chance to add or subtract years in which that you like to add to your budget grid. And in order for you to not only forecast your budget, but as well as to add it to, so in order for you to forecast your budget and as well as attach it to your regional control, you only need data for 1 year. And so with that being said, we're just going to add our revenue here. And then so for revenues, we're going to name this one property tax. And so we've officially created the first line of our budget. Now, although we do have the name here, but you as the user have to give it meaning. So we're going to go over here to our pencil button, which is going to allow us to edit the budget item. And then so with editor, you can choose to input your budget data here or in the previous screen. But the most important components of this particular section is going to be your indicators and as well as your policy variable, because your economic indicators are going to allow for you to determine what particular impacts determine your growth rate. So we're just going to go down here. And so as you all can see is that we have a wealth of options in which you can choose for your economic indicators, from demand, output, property income, personal income. It is basically your choice. But for this particular one, we can choose either property income, and as you can see is that you can choose how you like to adjust your detail weights, or you can choose whichever one in which that you like. But we're just going back to our property income. And then these features over here, which is your averaging weights and as well as your fixed amount. All of these features are by default, well, averaging weights are by default equal unless you wanted to go in and calibrate your budget level. So this is basically to ensure that your effective rate will be calculated using the weighted average. But but unless you are looking for, but most people, or rather most users either choose between equal weights or either the custom feature in order to calibrate this particular section. And we also have here your fixed amount if you have a minimal level in which that your budget has to meet. And then next is going to be your relationship option, whereas you can either do direct or the inverse. And then the next is going to be your projections. And then so your projected budget can also be seen in the previous screen of your budget calibration. So either you can wait to do this here or you can do it on the previous one. So just going to go back to indicators. Then we're going to go over here to our policy variable. And again, we can choose between either non-consumer price, production costs, capital costs, personal taxes, whichever in which you like. But for the sake of this particular one, we can we'll just do personal taxes. And as you can see, is that you can calculate your spreading weights. However, some people or some states do prefer to use the state taxes option because it gives you more options, especially to include a federal offset, and as well as to include your marginal propensity to consume. And you also have the freedom to adjust those to your liking as well. And then you can either copy and paste your budget numbers from your Excel sheet or wherever in which you store your data, or you can just type them in manually. But since we aren't going to necessarily use this circular budget, we're going to use one that has already been created. This is just for the sake of step-by-step process and understanding of how to set these things up. So we'll just put 800 here. And then next we have our expenditures. And then it is the same thing, whereas we will add our expenditure here. And so we could say, for example, education. And then we can put college here. And again, we're going to go to edit. Excuse me. And to our indicators. And then for our economic indicators, we can choose here college population. And we also have several others, or we can do it by a 5-year or 1-year age cohort, depending upon how you like for the model to calculate that. Again, you can adjust your weights as you like. And as far as policy variable, we can either use none or state and local government spending. And we have the option here to either include non-pecuniary amenity aspects, and as well as to include government employment, if you have those particular numbers, or if you'd like to calculate those spreading weights as well. And also the most important thing is that after you finish creating your particular budget line, and as well as giving it power through choosing the economic indicators and as well as policy variables, you're just going to go over here to save. And then so from there, we have a basic budget for the state of Oregon as of now. And with this, since we have, and with this being said, since we have our fiscal year 2020 numbers, we have the ability to forecast these if you'd like, based upon your standard regional control. And then so as we can see, is that it's not only going to give us the aggregate, say we had more budget lines, but as well as the projections for our property tax revenues. And we see that they'll increase. And the same thing for our expenditures as well. And next we'll move on to our feedback settings, because this is going to determine, well, so by default, your balanced budget feedback setting is going to be set at demand. If you change this to revenues, this is going to basically tell our system that you prefer a balanced budget. Most states do not require that, but the states who do, it'd be best to choose the revenues function here. But however, if your state does not require a balanced budget, it is best to just leave this at default with demand, because after you create your budget and you choose revenues, you will not be able to change it. So that's just something to keep in mind, especially when it's time for you to attach this to your regional forecast. I'm sorry, to your region. And lastly, here what we have is that, say if your budget line is very extensive, you do have the power to aggregate several lines into one. And just so you can just have a more organization, and as well as more understanding of the different expenditure and as well as revenue groups. So with that being said, is that say we were going to keep this budget, we click save here. like I said, I'm just going to show you all an example of a pre-built budget, in which we already have in this model, which is going to be our detailed budget for the state of Oregon. And this was sourced from Oregon's state website. So, yes. And so these are the values and as well as the budget lines in which that we are going to analyze in today's presentation. And as well as the expenditures as well. Who's going to save this? And then so our next step in this process, since we do have our budget ready, which is going to be our detailed budget, that we're going to go to our forecast tab. Now, it's very important that you all remember this step, because this is going to determine whether or not you can fully activate the TaxPI fiscal impacts. So the first thing which we do here is that you're always going to choose your standard national control, because your standard national control is always going to give you your new regional control option. If you choose one of these, you'll just get a new simulation. So just remember that. So now we're going to go over here to our new regional control. And this is going to allow for us to do numerous things if you like, which include a population update and employment update. And the most important thing, which is skipping over here to our forecast options, which is to attach our budget. And so since we said that we're going to use our detailed budget for this one, I'm going to just choose that one. And again, it's asking me again, would I like a balanced budget feedback? We're going to disable this. Disable this, because this could greatly skew our results. And for our run years, you can choose to run this for how many years in which that you may prefer. But however, I would not recommend that you cut this short, for the simple fact that once you run this particular budget for X amount of years or what have you, regardless of how far in which that you would like to forecast your analysis, you'd have to stay within that, within that constraint. So we're just going to take this all the way up till 2060. And of course, you can increase or decrease your settings of how many times in which that you like to repeatedly run your particular budget to ensure accuracy. But by default, the minimum is going to be 15, the max is going to be 35. And as well as the solution tolerance. It's going to be as listed. So with that being said, we're just going to forecast. And so this is going to include our baseline in which that we have at the bottom of our home screen, and as well as the projected fiscal impacts of our baseline without policy shocks. So the way in which that we can see this is by choosing our TaxPI tab here, then going over here to our budget. And so we have the ability to either look at this as a table or either as a graph over here. And as we can see, it seems as if that Oregon, without any policy shocks, is actually projected to have a budget surplus through all the way until 2060. And we can also track where exactly this surplus is coming from, or rather which particular revenues is contributing to this, by doing the same thing, but clicking revenues, and we'll go over here. And the primary one is individual income taxes, as well as selective sales and gross receipts and taxes. And the third one is other sales and gross receipts taxes. And as well as with our expenditures, we also have the same capability as well. As we can see, our biggest spending is on human services. And so after you've explored what does your baseline look like with your fiscal impacts attached, it's very important as well to save this forecast. So we're going to go up here and we're just going to name this TaxPI training region. And press OK here. And then we can exit out of here. And then so now we can actually run our actual simulation, which is to understand the impacts of rising housing prices on the state of Oregon. So we're just going to go here to our new simulation. And we're going to layer this on top of what we already have. And then so for this particular scenario, we're going to use the consumer spending variable. Although you do have a diverse range of options in which that you could use to forecast real estate as well. But for this particular scenario, we really wanted to forecast this from the demand side and to ensure that our particular policy variable could basically to ensure that the particular policy variable chosen could basically fully represent that. So we're just going to go over here to our full list. I'm just going to type in consumer spending here, all caps. Increase in housing. Press select. And then so as far as housing, REMI features 3 housing types, which includes rental of tenant occupied non-farm housing, the imputed rental of owner occupied non-farming imputed rental of owner occupied non-farming housing, and as well as group housing. And so we're actually going to group these together. Since they're all, since we're grouping housing prices as one. And then we're actually not going to reallocate consumption in this particular case because it's not needed in this particular scenario, unless you did want to add it to your analysis. But for the sake of this demo, we're just not going to choose that step. And then for our region, it's Oregon. And then for units, we're going to choose our share of consumption. And then we're going to choose percent here. You're going to add this to our editor. And you're going to go to edit values. And then from here, we're going to copy and paste from the years 2020 until 2022. Then we're just going to paste these values here. And the next step of this, we'll click run. We'll click add to inputs. Then we'll go over here to our forecast options. And our detailed budget is already selected. And we're just going to run our forecast. And so, as we can see, is that it seems as if that up until the years 2025, this actually had a very positive impact on the economy from the differences, from the comparison type of being differences. And we can also adjust this, well, we can also show this through a line chart. So let's see this graphically. However, with this economic boom, there also was, there also came very much so a dip in the economy starting in the years 2026. Well, according to, excuse me. So we saw a tremendous dip starting in the year, it seems like here, 2023. But however, things start to trend down for every economic output, particularly in 2026. And then without any type of intervention, we can see that things kind of just leveled off to the baseline. Excuse me, things start to trend down. So with that being said, but one thing which that we do notice is that the population continued to increase throughout the years. So that the labor force and as well as personal income. And then so the reason, so what we can take from this is that, as stated earlier in the PowerPoint, is that due to the fact that Oregon has many amenities, it's still going to attract people regardless of the very limited housing in which that it has currently. And then, so with that being the economic summary, we can also analyze this further using the TaxPI capability by reviewing our budget. And so we can go over here to understand this graphically. So as we can see, is that up until the year 2023, it seems, according to this graph, there's actually a budget surplus, an extreme budget surplus. And then there was a budget deficit. And then 2024 and onward, there was also a budget surplus. So what we can assume topically is the fact that rising housing prices actually benefit state economies tremendously, especially because there's only a short period where there was a budget deficit. Well, a period of mostly about 10 years, but overall in the long run, it benefits the state of Oregon. And then we can also review this further to understand where this is coming from, especially with the revenues. And we can see here is that the primary drivers are going to be your selective sales and gross receipts, as well as the, the selective sales and gross receipts, and as well as the individual income taxes, which is, again, expected. And we can also understand the drivers here, this other graph, to understand how the indicator affected the, such as understanding how the indicators actually affected the regional actual capital stock, as well as like if you had an input effective rate or even the fixed amount here, that would have also shown those adjustments as well. But this in particular is for, excuse me, I almost forgot to mention this, but this also shows you for each individual revenue line in which that you put in here. So for property taxes, this was particularly attached to the regional actual capital stock. And as I said before, you could have used that or whatever which you choose. And as well as just for another one, we'll choose the general sales and gross receipts taxes. And this was attached to the personal consumption expenditures. And then we can see how this led to this particular budget line's growth rate. And the same thing with the expenditures. We can also view this as well to understand what were the biggest drivers in spending. which as we can see was education, then second was human services. And the indicators are the same as well. With education, with the population cohort, then public safety. Oops. Yes, and then with public safety as well. And so, with that being said, with the TaxPI add-on, it allows for you to understand the dynamic macroeconomic fiscal analysis of policy, and as well as to understand the drivers, and as well as to mitigate some of the effects, such as the 10-year deficit period in which that Oregon basically went through before it had another budget surplus after the housing price boom. But we can also view this further using our socioeconomic indicators module, which allows for us to understand things outside of the budget, and as well as our traditional economic output variables. So we can look at how this affected different income levels. And so with our industry, and then so with employment by, with the employment by the income level, during the first few years of the housing, of consumer spending more on housing, as you can see, is that this led to a boom in the lowest 20%. And so this is assumed because now you have an increased population, and as well as you have significant construction going on to support this new onset of people that are being attracted to Oregon. And then the second would be the middle 20%, then the third. Oh, let me take out all, I'm going to take out all industries, because the third would be the second 20%, which would account for those within the construction industry as well. But as we can see, is that employment by the industries had little to no, had very, or like little to no growth over the years. And we can also put a demographics lens on this as well, whereas we can separate this by race, gender, or combine the two. And so it is expected that there was more growth for the white non-Hispanic populations because of Oregon's population. But overall, it seems as if that during the economic boom, in a sense, all groups benefited from this particular change. But however, throughout the years, as we can see, is that it's very or little to no significant changes. And if you wanted to dig into these further, you could also look at the actual percent changes as well. And and then also with the employment by education, we're able to understand how occupations, how either all occupations or how individual occupations are affected. And we can categorize this by the year, whether or not this created more jobs that require no bachelor's degree or bachelor's degree and above. Just for an example, so we're starting in 2020, and we'll put this in 2040. And as we can see, it actually created more jobs that required a bachelor's degree or above. And you also have the choice to get more granular within your analysis as well. And with that being said, this and then with that being said, if you all wanted to explore more of these features, or say if you wanted a demo of all of the features of the SCI module, please feel free to email info@remi.com, and we'll be glad to set up something with you as well. And as well as if you want a more in-depth TaxPI training that suits your needs or like your particular analysis, we'd be glad to. And we also be glad to do that as well. And then with that being said, we can now transition to our questions and answers portion. And I really appreciate all of you for allowing me to help guide you through the TaxPI module. the TaxPI model along with the SCI module add-on. And I'll be happy to answer any questions in which that you may have. Thank you again for giving me an hour of your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Gaisha. And with that, we will start off with some questions. Again, if you do have any questions, you can submit them in the portal area where it says questions. We do have a question that's related to the topic you were just talking about. They were just curious if it was also for retired people, for retirees.
Yes. Yes, so we do have a section within our particular model where in the population, whereas in the population, you can actually view that particular portion of the population. Like say if you were curious about that, what about the details of those particular migrants?
And
then that's within, oh, I'm sorry.
Nope, keep going.
Oh, and I just wanted to say, and then that's actually within your TaxPI model, and it's not a feature of the SCI module though. So, yeah.
So to go off of that, what is the smallest or largest geographic level that the model can show us for results?
So the largest would be the United States or whatever country in which you like, depending upon the data available. But in the smallest then the smallest would be census blocks. So a city. So that's usually how small we'll go. But of course, if you'd like to discuss something that's smaller than the city, it probably can be done, but feel free to email at info@remi.com and we can discuss those things with you to see if we have something to fit your needs or see if we can customize your needs. Excuse me.
Perfect. Thank you, Gaisha. And then we do have one more question. Are there any more geographical factors that this model takes into account other than the ones that you went over today?
Geographical, no, because every model is going to be customized according to the state. So with this particular model, it's just taking on all of the aggregate data for the state of Oregon. So with the jobs, population, the GDP, and yeah, so it's just taking an aggregate of everything.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Gaisha. That is all the questions for today. If you do have any more questions, you can always email the email that is attached to this, which would be mine. And we can get back to you as soon as possible. And on that note, thank you, Gaisha, for the excellent presentation. And I know that you are actually moving your career forward outside of REMI. So I just want to thank you personally for all of your great work that you did for REMI and the time that you spent here.
And thank you so much, Amanda, for all of your guidance, help, and of course, all of the, basically being like a shining light. So I really appreciate you. So.
Thank you. No, you're welcome. All right. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Do the same.